Welcome to the AWS Rethink podcast, here to help you rethink your strategy in the cloud. I'm your host, Nolan Chen.
And I'm your host, Anujayanti.
Deploying in the cloud is not only a strategic technology decision, it can also be a significant financial investment. Today, we talk to Aran Khanna, co-founder and CEO of Archera, a company that helps customers with FinOps and mitigating financial risks that come with deploying in the cloud. Welcome, Aran.
Thank you so much for having me, Nolan and Anu.
Okay, Aran, well, let's just dive right into it. Let's begin. Can you tell us what Archera does and how you came or why did you start this company?
Yeah, Archera is a completely free cost optimization or FinOps platform that offers the world's first and only cloud commitment insurance. Actually, the idea for Archera came to me when I was at AWS, sitting on your guys' side of the fence, working on launching the SageMaker and broader AI and deep learning suite of tools at AWS and trying to get customers to adopt them. And as you might be aware, GPUs are expensive and they were about as expensive then relatively as they are now. And what was tough for my customers who wanted to adopt these GPUs in the cloud was always this trade-off between cost and flexibility. Now they had CapEx GPUs just sitting under their desks and they wanted to move to the cloud. Their data was in the cloud. The operating model and the flexibility they were able to bring to bear on the problems they were trying to solve made a lot more sense in the cloud. But the cost difference between that capitalized GPU and the on demand pricing was always a really big gap. However, we knew that customers were going to run these workloads likely for the entire term of this commitment. And generally, they were just reticent to commit to get the savings, and that was holding up a lot of deals. And actually, I wrote a document to try and pitch this idea of commitment insurance within Amazon and there's obviously a lot of competing priorities, and I was told this wasn't going to happen. So I took some of that famous Amazonian bias for action and started Archera with the idea of trying to build this underwriting model to help customers actually go and commit to something like a 1 year or 3 year commitment, but have that downside protection in case at month 6 they no longer could use that commitment. The other problem that we're really solving is the fact that cost management was really complicated. And to even get to the point of figuring out what commitments you should be considering, and if you should even consider insurance for commitments as a more advanced step on top of that, you need to get the basics right. And a lot of my customers who I worked with at Amazon were reticent to go and pay a vendor some ongoing percentage of spend or savings to get those basics in place. And so that's really where the idea of how we deliver the insurance came with a completely free, super customer obsessed platform where we have customers who save millions of dollars a year using our cloud cost and FinOps tools and not paying Archera a penny, just so we can have the opportunity to highlight where this insurance could be valuable in getting them to that next level in terms of their FinOps strategy.
That's a very interesting background. Thanks for sharing the details. Can you talk a little bit about why FinOps is necessary and what are the recent advancements in this space?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, when we were first starting Archera back in 2019, FinOps was still very early. In fact, people talked a lot about cloud cost optimization as a task that was essentially shifted left onto developers, SREs, engineers, and system administrators as part of all the other things they have to do to go and operate the cloud environment. But as companies started to put more and more of not just R&D spend, but core, cost of goods sold production spend onto the cloud, the actual practice of managing cloud costs and being that bridge between the finance team, the product teams, the engineering and cloud platform team really came into its own as a full-time role. And the practice of FinOps is really the practice of developing the kind of core pieces of inform, operate, and optimize what that role is actually supposed to go in and do as a dedicated function. Really, when we look at FinOps, because there's a foundation as part of the Linux Foundation that actually manages and takes it forward. And there's a lot of interesting open source projects like Focus, which is a unified billing standard that all the cloud providers, including AWS, have signed on to go and support. That's kind of the nuts and bolts tactically what's happening in the FinOps ecosystem. But when we zoom out and really look at what is FinOps, what are the activities, and what are the tools that we use there, it starts to become a little bit more specific and grounded in kind of some of the things that Archera helps customers do. So to really take a step back and understand what are the ways to save on the cloud, they really break into two broad buckets. One bucket we call usage optimization. That is where you're actually going and changing infrastructure, doing things like right sizing instances, turning off or deleting unused resources, and then maybe even doing things like replatforming, moving from Intel machines to AWS Graviton machines, or moving from EC2 server based to serverless architecture to try and take advantage of more kind of efficient and granular usage and billing. All of that is in the bucket of infrastructure impacting changes where your engineers generally need to be in the loop. And that's one category of how to save on the cloud. The other category we call rate optimization. And that's more around actually looking at the commitments to the underlying resources, or even enterprise commitments to the cloud vendors themselves, and going as far as looking at things like credit programs also. How, without changing the underlying infrastructure, or even getting engineering involved in the loop, can you go and optimize the rate you are paying for the underlying instances and usage that you have in your cloud environment? And that second bucket is broadly where our share of focus is. It's automation and insurance efforts. It is not infrastructure impacting, which means we usually don't have to go and talk to individual engineering teams before optimizing. We can often make these decisions in an automated fashion, and often with just a FinOps team in the loop, instead of requiring sign off from underlying engineering teams. And so that's generally where FinOps and cloud cost management at a high level starts, and broadly where Archera plays. But even within that, there are kind of three distinct product categories that often FinOps teams go and adopt that really help them get after the full life cycle of optimization. The first is really cost visibility and forecasting. That's figuring out across, not even just AWS, but other services that are associated with your workloads like Datadog or Snowflake or Databricks. What are you paying for your individual business units and your projects? What is the actual attributed cost? Things like tag management and making sure you have clean underlying data and attribution is very important here. And there's a whole suite of tools, including free ones from Archera, that help with that. And then using that visibility, using that forecasting, using that, unit cost to go and drive forecasts, that's kind of the next step there, to try and figure out what are you potentially going to be paying as these resources scale, as your usage scales, as the number of customers you serve scales into the future, and what are the optimization opportunities to actually pay less on a per unit basis. That's one of the interesting things about the cloud. You can optimize a lot and still pay more and be happy about it. Why is that? Because as you optimize, you actually free up budget and you can invest in new projects that potentially drive new efficiencies in your business. And so having that FinOps mindset, having that visibility in that category really nailed down in your company helps you understand, not just what's going out the door in terms of cost, but what are you getting back? What are you, in terms of, unit economics, actually going and paying on a per user or per client or per call basis to support the other business functions, right? And are you going to be doing these optimizations to get more of that for less money? So that's the first piece, and that's kind of the baseline. The next piece is generally where Archera comes in, and that's commitment optimization. Now, what we do is a little bit different from other folks in the space. A lot of people will say, hey, I'm going to take over all your commitments and just manage it for you on your behalf. Archera takes a little bit of a different approach, where we have a low floor, high ceiling, very transparent model where customers can come in, plan and execute native AWS commitments in the platform, editing, all the way down to the line item at their heart's content, and never pay us a penny. They are only charged when they choose to include insurance for any of their commitments in the overall plans they've made. And customers can then go and automate the execution of commitment strategies, again, free of charge, save for any insurance they choose to include in the platform as well. So it's not really a black box, more of a transparent box that we provide to customers there. And again, entirely for free if you're just planning and executing native AWS commitments without our optional insurance. And then the last category, which is really where there's a ton of great vendors depending on your infrastructure stack, is the usage optimization category of tools. So if you're using Lambda, there's a ton of great tools to help you optimize your Lambda calls. If you're using Kubernetes, there's great tools, for example, to help you schedule that Kubernetes workload on spot. And so there's an awesome ecosystem of tools out there on the usage optimization front, many of which actually Archera partners with, such as Stormforge in the Kubernetes optimization space, to really help customers and engineers specifically on those individual teams running the underlying infrastructure, run that infrastructure as efficiently as possible. So hopefully that gave you a good top level map of the cloud cost space and the products within it and sort of where Archera sits.
That was a comprehensive description. My next question is something around the CapEx and OpEx. Looks like with the introduction of FinOps, especially the things that you mentioned about the commitment, insurance option, infrastructure spend is counted more towards the CapEx, but typically during the initial cloud adoption or even during the POC phase, most of the customers focus on operational expenses. And this is the key emphasis of cloud adoption. However, with the introduction of savings plan and insurance-like models, the strategy shifts from OpEx back to CapEx. How do you help customers adapt back to this change?
Yeah, so I think the CapEx versus OpEx trade-off is a little bit distinct. It's not like we're going back to the world of running your data center because we're asking, customers to put a reservation down, on an instance or an amount of spend, right? A lot of stuff is still abstracted away from them. And, the idea of getting into the data center, getting to that OpEx model is usually step one. It's the migration. But when we look at modernization, the next step, and actually going through that transition from migrating everything from running in the data center to running on demand to then modernizing, that's when you have to start thinking about this rate optimization. And it's not so much moving back to a CapEx model. In fact, making a no upfront commitment could just lower your rate as long as you're still having that kind of same cash out the door, no upfront, non-capitalized model. But you're just making a commitment to use this machine for a year or 3 years. So there are ways in which the commitments themselves are not actually negatively impacting cash flow the same way that buying or capitalizing or leasing a server will necessarily impact cash flow. What Archera does to make this a little bit easier for customers who are transitioning from that on-demand, hour by hour, I just migrated my machine state to a more long-term 1 year or 3 year commitment, after going through some modernization and engineering effort, is to say, hey, you've just migrated, you don't know what your final architecture is going to look like, but you want to start moving towards a better unit cost for these workloads that you have moved over into the cloud. And that was actually what was promised. That was the reason that you moved out of your data center and moved out of this CapEx model, this OpEx model, among other things. Great. Instead of doing that 7, 8, 9 months down the line, once you've gone through this modernization and re-architected and figured out what a better kind of long-term architecture is for a full year, commit today to the level of spend and the kind of usage that you are running. And what happens if, 6 months down the line, you realize that was the wrong commitment? Well, if you commit with the insurance that Archera provides, Archera will cover the entire remaining cost of that commitment. So it helps customers avoid that downside risk and commit faster to what they're using to get to that better unit cost. And often what we find is that, customers will often, not re-architect in that time. They will focus on moving more infrastructure just because once they make that commitment, they realize the cost is bearable enough where it might not even make sense to go through a full re-architecture. There are better ways to put that engineering effort in that time while they still have that door and that lever to pull and that door open. It's not necessarily a two-way door or one-way door decision anymore. So that's how we see often customers use this with relation to kind of their migrations and modernizations and how they think about going from the CapEx model to the OpEx model and back to sort of a committed model like I alluded to, but one that's still distinctly different than that old CapEx model they moved out of, but often providing much better unit economics when we think about getting them to the point where they can make that 3-year commitment, which is hopefully something that we make, much easier for the customer to go through.
Thanks, Iran. We've already covered a lot of ground, and it fascinates me because I'm more of a technology guy. Every time I log into AWS console, I mean, I know there's a billing dashboard, but I don't think FinOps doesn't come top of my mind, probably because I'm not always the one paying the bill. But I appreciate how you laid out how FinOps can be quite involved and quite comprehensive. You talked about like 3 different product categories like cost visibility, commitment optimization, and usage optimization. Just to be clear, Archera, you provide a platform, is that right, that helps customers manage all these aspects of FinOps?
Correct. We provide a full life cycle kind of automation for the cost visibility piece, as well as the commitment management piece. Full automation, full life cycle kind of platform for both of those pieces, entirely for free. In the commitments piece, we also offer this commitment insurance as an opt-in option. That's really how we monetize our platform. And then we provide visibility on the usage optimization front, and actually partner with a number of providers like Stormforge, who I mentioned on the Kubernetes side, to get customers optimized at that level. But we don't actually take permissions to ever impact running infrastructure. We provide visibility there, and then we work with partners who will actually take those deeper level of permissions in the individual accounts with the ability to impact running infrastructure.
Okay. I'd like to talk a little bit more about what you call insured commitments. I think that's what intrigues me about your company is that yeah, how does exactly insurance for the cloud work, and how is it different than other types of insurance people are more familiar with?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, this came from my time really working at AWS, working at SageMaker, trying to sell committed GPU spend to customers. And, the one thing that was universal is that customers tended to undercommit. They tended to undercommit for a number of reasons, but, the primary one was just uncertainty. The fact that customers often could not see 1 or 3 years into the future. And, as today with generative AI moving so fast, even back then, customers were reticent to committing so far ahead when technology, the underlying GPUs and the models themselves were changing every 3 to 6 months. Cloud commitments are also quite complex. Forecasting spend is really difficult, and because of all of that, customers broadly tended to undercommit. And so from an insurance perspective, there was really an opportunity to come in and say, hey, Mr. or Mrs. Customer, you're undercommitted because of all the things that could go wrong and you want to limit your downside risk. But, if every customer is undercommitting, most of these customers, if they actually commit to the right level, to the level at which, their usage demands, instead of committing 20% lower, and we share the risk on the back end, we can easily cover the downside of any one person missing their commitment. So from like a classic insurance market perspective, I could see this while I was at Amazon as a common theme across customers. And so that's when we left and tried to figure out what was the actual right model to go and provide some amount of downside protection. And we landed on this idea of an insured commitment, which says, hey, if you commit, say, for 1 year to a resource, but you're not certain, even after, say, the first 30 days, if you're going to use it, we can write you a contract that says, hey, we've looked at the usage. We think this is a pretty stable workload or amount of spend. And, you don't seem ready to commit because there's going to be some potential migration or modernization or who knows what in the future. We will say that we're going to take some small percentage of the savings that comes out of making that commitment as a premium. And after the first, say, 30 days, if you don't use the remainder of the commitment, we will basically pay you back the entire cost. So it's almost like you didn't make the commitment. We are giving you a money back guarantee and protecting your downside. And that helped over 200 AWS customers last year make their first ever commit to the cloud. So clearly it is something that is a problem that customers are looking for a solution to. And unlike models like a resale model or an arbitrage model, which we've seen in this space to try and provide customers some amount of flexibility or downside protection, this actually is something that works with the existing account model customers have. They don't have to go and join some reseller organization. They don't have to give up control of their commitments. It's almost like Geico, right? You own
Hmm.
your car. We're just writing you an insurance contract. But there are other models that customers have, come to our platform for, where other people own their commitments. It was almost like Hertz. They were like leasing a car from someone. So this different model, I think, also is something that really resonates with customers who care a lot about owning their own account and having that full control over the strategy and viewing their FinOps vendors like us as another tool in the tool belt rather than kind of a full platform that does everything for you on your behalf. I think especially sophisticated FinOps users need that control because they are negotiating very complex trade-offs between the business, the engineering, and the underlying cloud vendors and the primitives that they offer.
Okay. So, I mean, you mentioned how you've noticed customers tend to undercommit. So what we're saying is because they undercommitted, a lot of times they just end up realizing they do need these resources longer, and then they just end up paying more than they needed to.
Correct.
Okay. And with that, are you able to share like any numbers, like because of Archera, what the average commitment is now? I mean, does it go? I think with AWS, right? Most customers do 1 to 3 years for reserve instances or savings plans. Do you usually just do they usually end up committing to 1 to 3 years or even more than longer than that?
Yeah, so I mean, what we see in general, because all customers are different. We work with, now thousands of installed users, ranging from big strategic Fortune 5 customers all the way down to 2 and 3 person startups. So a pretty big range. But last year, we helped over $177 million of commitment get created to AWS thanks to our insurance tool. In that, we've seen that customers actually commit 1.3 times longer when they have this commitment insurance. They commit
Mhm.
much faster. So the average time to commit goes down by almost 80% because the big hand wringing comes with the downside risk, and this completely obviates that. And then actually what's interesting is that we see customers 6 months after installing Archera and buying this insurance, they tend to be spending around 30% more because they are getting better rates than they are used to for these resources. There's no downside risk. And so they use those savings to reinvest in new projects and then buy these insured commitments for those new projects because they know they're going to run at least, say 3 months. And then as those scale, the savings from what would have been running on demand get reinvested into projects again from there. So it's really interesting to see not only do the savings, materially impact the customer's willingness to commit, but it also impacts the customer's willingness to consume. They actually consume more.
This is a very novel idea about insured commitments. Thanks for breaking it down for us. You actually alluded earlier to the Gen AI. So with Gen AI catching up and compute demands increasing, are there any strategies that you recommend for managing costs and risks associated to expensive AI and GPU projects? Typically, customers feel this could be short term. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so I think the major thing is to go in with eyes wide open. And the concrete advice I give is to build a forecast, build a scenario plan. And that's actually something that Archera offers for free with its cost visibility and forecast tools, is the ability to go in and build a hypothetical plan where you're looking at some number of P5 instances or SageMaker Hyperpod, and what it looks like if you do commitments versus insured commitments on top of that. And the net of that is you should understand, given a few different deployment models and given a few different options in terms of how long to run it for, ranging from, something like bidding on a capacity block for ML in AWS or spot instances or a reserved or an on-demand instance. You should, get a good sense of what the actual cost trade-offs are. And once you have that nailed down, it's really a function of going to the engineering team, going to the data science team, and understanding, how far forward they can kind of project their demand for these resources, if there's any uncertainty, or if this is truly just a short-term project. And once you have a sense of the timeline and the cost, then I think is the right time to go forward and make a decision. And just because every deep learning project is different, the requirements from a hardware perspective, for example, are different. A lot of customers can only run on H100s because the model size precludes them from running on a smaller instance. Many, more distilled small instances could run on something like an A10. So those are all considerations that need to be made. It's not easy, but at least once you have those hypotheticals and those numbers, you can make the investment decision with eyes wide open.
Thanks, Saran. I want to switch gears a little bit and go back to your personal journey. You started by mentioning about your career at Amazon. Obviously, you had a great career going at AWS. So I'm curious, now that you're an entrepreneur, what advice would you have for people who are thinking of starting a company?
Yeah, I mean, I think that Amazon's an amazing place to learn how to start a company. In many ways, it is true to that ethos of being the world's largest startup. And so a lot of what I've taken forward from there and implemented at Archera, I think, is the common advice that I would give to other folks looking to start a business, which is be customer obsessed, work backwards from your customers and your stakeholders to understand how to solve the problems that they're having. But while that is important, also understand that you have to invent on behalf of those customers. They'll tell you a problem, they'll tell you their thoughts about how to fix it, but that might not be the right solution, right? So listen to them on the problem, but don't necessarily listen on the solution, because often what we are hearing when we were talking to customers about this is, oh, I want a reseller who is better at this, not I want commitment insurance. So that idea of inventing and simplifying on behalf of the customer, I think, is also very powerful. So both of those principles, I think, when I came out of Amazon and started the company, helped really guide me. And I'd recommend anyone who's looking, say, out of college without any work experience to go and start a company. You can always learn on the job. That's one way to do it. But I think I'm really lucky that I was able to go to a company that has an innovation culture and learn how to build a product from the ground up on behalf of existing customers. Gets you a leg up, I think, in many respects when you're going in and doing this for yourself for the first time.
Thanks, Ron. I'm going to conclude by one more sort of a devil's advocate question. What are some reasons not to start a company, or what are some wrong reasons to start a company?
Well, I think the worst reason to start a company is to go make a lot of money, because you could do that any number of ways, especially not starting kind of a venture scale startup, where obviously if you're going and starting a company, not just a small business for yourself, but a company where you're taking outside capital, the impetus is to grow it as big as it can be. And so if your job is to go and change the world, I think doing a venture-backed startup is great if that's your passion. But if your passion is to go and make a lot of money, there's other great ways to go and do that without necessarily becoming a venture-backed startup. It could be starting a business, but maybe not, a mega scale software business selling to now, thousands of customers through things like the AWS marketplace and, working with hundreds of partners. That's just a different type of business. And if you are not passionate about it, it will probably not be the greatest fit for you, because you've got to put your soul into it for years and years and years.
Okay. Well, as a current Amazonian, I really appreciate you sharing your journey, especially how I really appreciate how you really took the leadership principles of customer obsession and ownership and bias to action for heart, and that you weren't discouraged when your initial proposal for this didn't exactly become prioritized here at Amazon. So, but now that you're changing the world for Amazon customers, and I think we as Amazonians appreciate that. So, thank you.
I appreciate all you guys, and yeah, you're right. Maybe I could have had a little bit more disagree and commit in me, but but thankfully I didn't, and now Archera exists. So no, I'm always happy to chat with other folks from Amazon. I think it's a really special place, and we continue to be super excited to be partnered with you all.
Okay, best luck to you, and of course, we'll be following and partnering with you in the years ahead. And with that, that brings us to the end of our show today. So I'd like to thank you again, Aran. I think you've helped our customers today rethink their FinOps strategy in the cloud.
Thank you very much for having me. It was great to be here.
Thank you. We also want to thank all our listeners for joining us today. Please send your feedback by emailing us at rethinkpodcast@amazon.com.
Thank you. Until next time.